I was raised to be quiet. Dress in white. Smile on command. But in the summer of 1858, blood stained my white gloves, and silence died in our house. Father ruled Whitmore Plantation like a king. 5,000 acres, 300 people in chains. He said a daughter's duty is obedience. He said my body proved his power. One night he tried to prove it in a way that turned my stomach to ice and my heart to iron. That night, I made a pact, 6 of us in the dark, me and 5 men my father owned. No shouting, no speeches, just a whisper passed hand to hand. We end this. The plan was simple and terrible. Steal the papers, empty the safe, cut the dogs loose on the wrong scent, light the match only when the house is ready to fall. If you're hearing this, know one thing. I did not choose shame. I chose war, and a dynasty that stood for 40 years fell in 40 hours. Before we go on, if you care about buried history and truth that hurts to hear, subscribe and comment your state below. Tell me where you're listening from, because tonight we walk through the big house with wet lamp wicks and dry floors. We count the steps between whip and freedom, and we ask the only question that matters. When the price of freedom is blood, will you pay it? My name is Margaret Whitmore, only daughter of Colonel Thaddeus Whitmore, master of the largest cotton plantation in Wilkes County, Georgia. People in church pews called us refined. Neighbors called us prosperous. But behind those painted smiles and polished silver spoons, our house was built on chains, and my father's hands never let go of the whip. Whitmore Plantation stretched wider than the eye could see. 5,000 acres of red Georgia soil, every inch worked by enslaved hands. 300 souls bent under the sun, their sweat feeding the cotton that lined our pockets with gold. Father was proud of it. He used to say, "A man's worth is measured by how many bow their heads when he walks past." By that measure, he believed himself a king, and I, his only child, was to be his crown jewel. He dressed me in silks, taught me to play piano for guests, and smiled when others praised my beauty. But behind closed doors, he reminded me of my role. Obedience, silence, and sacrifice. Those were his holy words. A daughter's virtue is her father's property. Even as a child, I felt the house breathing with secrets. The creak of floors at night, whispers behind doors, the muffled sobs of women from the quarters that floated through open windows when the summer heat refused to sleep. Father's voice carried louder than prayers, sharper than any hymn. I was taught to look away, to keep my back straight and my eyes down, just like the enslaved people were forced to do. My mother had died when I was 10. They said fever, but I always wondered if grief had killed her. Grief at living in a house where her husband's word was law, and love meant nothing but possession. After her death, I was raised by governesses, women who taught me French and embroidery but never spoke of chains or blood. They taught me to smile in public but never to question in private. Father's obsession was legacy, not love, not family, legacy. He used to pour bourbon by the fire and say to me, "The Whitmore name must never weaken, Margaret. You will secure it, whether by marriage or by sacrifice. A dynasty is built by iron hands, not soft hearts." I didn't understand then what those words meant. I thought they were just lessons in pride, but pride has a cost, and his cost would be paid in blood. In town, people admired him. He was invited to every fine dinner, every political meeting. They praised his discipline, never daring to call it what it was, cruelty polished with Southern gentility. They whispered that Whitmore cotton was the finest, because Colonel Thaddeus drove his slaves harder than any man in Georgia. And I, dressed in lace and pearls, was paraded as proof that his world was perfect. But perfection is a mask. Masks crack, and the cracks had already begun. I saw it in the eyes of Samuel, the slave who kept my father's library. I saw it in the bruises of women forced to serve 2 masters, the fields by day and the overseer's bed by night. I saw it in my own reflection, staring at me from the gilt-edged mirror in my room, a girl dressed as a princess, but living in a prison gilded with gold. And deep down, I knew no house built on chains could stand forever. 1858 Georgia. One father, one daughter. A pact of silence is about to break. If obedience meant slavery of the soul, would you still obey? I was born into wealth, but it never felt like mine. My dresses came from Charleston, my shoes from Savannah, my pearls from New Orleans. Yet every stitch felt like a chain. Father said a daughter should shine like the moon, bright enough to light a man's path, but never so bright that she thought herself a star of her own. After Mother's death, silence filled our house. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that watches and judges. I had governesses who corrected my posture, rapped my knuckles when my embroidery strayed, and pressed the piano keys with icy fingers if I missed a note. They told me my worth was in being still, soft, and pleasing. A lady's voice, one of them said, is strongest when it's quiet. Father approved. He measured me not in love, but in obedience. Every smile I gave was inspected. Every bow, every curtsy weighed like coin on a scale. I became what they wanted, the perfect Southern belle. But inside I was empty, hollow as the china dolls on my shelf. The house itself was a prison. I was allowed to ride my horse, Athena, but never beyond sight of the big house. I could walk the manicured gardens, but never near the fields. The slave quarters were forbidden. No place for a lady's feet, Father said. But I knew the truth. He feared what I might see if I walked too close. He feared I might realize that my gilded cage was not so different from the iron chains that bound them. At church, neighbors smiled and told Father I was growing into a fine woman. They didn't see how tightly he held the reins on me, or maybe they chose not to. In the South, everyone learned to look away. Slaves looked away from whips. Wives looked away from bruises. Daughters looked away from the truth. But sometimes the truth stared back at me in the mirror, a face pale and polished, framed in curls and lace, yet eyes filled with questions I wasn't allowed to ask. Was I free, or was I just another kind of slave? One with silk instead of rags, pearls instead of iron, rules instead of whips. My nights were lonelier than the days. After supper, Father drank by the fire while I practiced my piano. The house fell into shadows. The only sounds the tick of the mantel clock and the distant cries from the quarters carried on the wind. I used to press my ear to the window pane, wondering what those cries meant, knowing but not daring to name it. Father's words haunted me. Sacrifice, obedience, silence. He said they were virtues. To me, they felt like chains. By the time I turned 19, I realized I had never once chosen my own path. Not what to wear, not what to read, not even whom to marry. My future was not mine. It was my father's bargaining chip, ready to be traded for land, wealth, or alliances. I was not a daughter. I was currency. That year, I swore to myself I would not die in that prison. But swearing and acting are not the same. It would take one man, a forbidden voice in the library, to show me what freedom might sound like. A daughter's cage is just as real as an iron shackle. Do you think wealth hides pain or multiplies it? The first time I truly saw him, rain was tapping against the tall windows of Father's library. I had gone in search of a book, poetry, something to quiet the storm inside me. The room smelled of old leather and tobacco. Shelves stacked with volumes Father collected but never read, and there he was, Samuel. He moved with care, dusting and cataloging Father's books as though they were treasures. He wasn't like the other enslaved men I'd been trained not to notice. He stood tall, lean, his movements precise, his eyes lowered in the way obedience demanded. But when he lifted his gaze just for a heartbeat, there was intelligence there, sharp as a blade hidden under cloth. "Pardon me, Miss Margaret," he said, stepping back. His voice was soft, respectful, but steady. "Didn't expect anyone in the library today." I asked for a book bound in blue leather. He knew exactly where it was. Without hesitation, he guided me to the shelf. My fingers brushed the spine, and I thanked him. That should have been the end of it. A fleeting exchange, forgotten like every other interaction with the people I had been told were invisible. But my eyes caught a smaller book left open on the desk. Its title shown in gold letters, Emerson's Essays. "You read this?" I asked, half in shock. Slaves were not meant to read. His face shifted like a man caught between truth and danger. "Just checking the inventory, miss." But I already knew. His hesitation told me everything. "What do you think of Emerson's ideas?" I pushed. My voice trembled. Part curiosity, part rebellion against every rule I had been raised under. For a moment, silence. Then in a voice low but steady, he said, "His words about the oversoul, that all souls are connected, I find them compelling, my heart skipped. It wasn't the careful reply of a servant. It was the considered thought of a scholar. For the first time in my life, someone in this house spoke to me not as property or daughter, but as equal mind to mind. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed in the hall. In an instant, Samuel lowered his eyes, hunched his shoulders, became the obedient figure Father expected. When Father entered, he saw nothing but a dutiful slave beside his daughter. The truth stayed hidden, alive only in the silence between Samuel and me. That night I could not sleep. His words echoed louder than the storm outside. All souls are connected. I had never been taught that. Father's lessons were chains. Samuel's words were keys. Over the weeks, I found reasons to visit the library more often, returning books I hadn't read, pretending to look for volumes I already knew by heart. And each time our conversations grew braver. We spoke of poetry, of history, of philosophy. He revealed a depth of knowledge my governesses had never touched. He did not lecture me. He did not measure me. He simply spoke, and in doing so he made me realize how small my world had been. That library became our secret world, a room filled with dangerous books, dangerous thoughts, and a dangerous truth. That Samuel was more than what Father believed. And that I was too. In silence, eyes spoke louder than words. Would you risk speaking truth if one word could cost your life? By summer, the library was no longer a room of books. It was a hiding place for truth. Every visit began the same. Me pretending to search the shelves, Samuel pretending to dust or catalog. But once the doors closed and the hallways grew quiet, the pretense melted. We spoke in whispers. At first, only of poetry and philosophy. Emerson, Aristotle, Milton. He taught me to read the spaces between words, the questions hidden in a text. But as trust grew, the whispers shifted. They became confessions, secrets, truths Father would have whipped out of Samuel and locked away from me. One evening he leaned closer than usual. "Do you know why your father bought me?" he asked. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried fire. I shook my head. "Because I can read and write. I keep his ledgers, his letters. I know his debts. His secrets." The air between us thickened. No one spoke of Father's business, not even his overseer. But Samuel knew everything, and he was telling me. Another time, his voice dropped lower. "There's talk in the quarters." Whispers of Judge Carlton. "Your father's arranging something." My stomach clenched. I had seen Judge Carlton once or twice, his greedy eyes following me at church socials. "What kind of arrangement?" I asked. Samuel hesitated. "Marriage. Property joined with property. Land combined with land." "It's you, part of the bargain." I felt the room spin. It was the first time I fully understood what Father meant when he spoke of legacy. My body, my life, my future, traded like cattle to secure more acres of soil. Samuel watched me struggle to breathe, then spoke again, softer. "Do you know what they say of Judge Carlton among the slaves?" I shook my head. "He killed his first wife," Samuel whispered. "Not with poison or a gun. With his hands. With discipline. She was never seen outside her house the last year of her life. The slaves covered the bruises with scarves and long sleeves when visitors came." The words struck harder than any blow. My throat went dry. My father wanted me in that man's house. My father would hand me to him as casually as handing over a deed. That night I cried into my pillow until the candle burned out. And yet, when I returned to the library the next day, Samuel's presence steadied me. He didn't say "I'm sorry," he didn't offer pity. He said only this: "You are not property, Margaret. Not to me." The words were a rebellion, dangerous enough to hang him if overheard. But they lit something inside me, a spark I had never felt before. I began to smuggle books to my room, hiding them under gowns and shawls. I read late into the night, filling my head with words Father would call poison. Each morning I carried questions back to the library. Each answer Samuel gave drew me deeper into his world, deeper into a truth I could not ignore. We were no longer just master's daughter and master's slave. We were two prisoners whispering through bars, planning a way to slip the locks. Every whisper was a weapon sharper than any blade. Would you trust love if discovery meant death? It happened on a night soaked in bourbon and pride. Father had invited 3 planters from neighboring counties. They feasted in the dining hall until their laughter rattled the silver. I sat at the table painted in lace and pearls, smiling as duty demanded. Inside I was stone. When the candles burned low, Father's voice rose above the drunken talk. A man must prove his house is strong, he declared. My slaves obey. My daughter obeys. Even my blood bends to my will. The men chuckled, raising their glasses. Then, in a voice meant to sting, Father added, Some of you whisper that I rule too hard, that my daughter is too proud. Tonight I'll prove neither rumor is true. He called for Samuel. He called for 4 others from the house staff. Men I had seen carrying water, chopping wood, polishing silver. Their eyes never rose when I passed. Tonight Father ordered them to follow me into the barn. The room spun. My throat locked. The planters laughed, pounding the table. Father smiled at me with cold triumph. Obedience, Margaret, sacrifice. Show them the Whitmore blood is unbreakable. I walked out, every step heavy as iron. Behind me, 5 men followed. Their faces were unreadable in the torchlight. The barn was dim, smelling of hay and sweat. The door shut with a thud, locking us in. For a moment, silence. Then Samuel stepped forward. You don't have to cry, he whispered. I hadn't realized tears were already burning my cheeks. This is his game, Samuel said, voice low but steady. He thinks to shame you. He thinks to break us. But we don't play his game. The other 4 moved closer, not as predators but as allies. Their names I would learn that night. Josiah, Elijah, Thomas, and Ben. Each had scars Father had carved. Each carried eyes that burned with fury long buried. And in that barn something unthinkable happened. We did not obey, we spoke, we planned. If he wants us bound, Samuel said, then let us be bound, but not by him. Bound to each other, 6 against 1. A pact. I looked at the 5 of them. Men my father thought he owned. Men he had whipped, sold their children, chained their bodies. And here I was, his daughter, the jewel of his crown now thrown into the same fire. I lifted my chin. My voice did not shake when I said, Then we make a promise. Tonight we turn his humiliation into his destruction. Each man nodded. No ceremony. No blood oath. Just eyes meeting eyes in the dark. That was enough. Father thought he was proving his power. Instead, he forged a rebellion in the barn. 6 of us joined not by shame but by rage. His dynasty would end by the very hands he tried to use as weapons. A pact in blood was signed in silence. If vengeance demanded your body, would you give it? The barn smelled of sweat, hay, and fear. Father's footsteps faded toward the big house, leaving us in silence. 6 figures caught in a trap he thought he had built. I could almost hear his laughter carried in the night air. He believed he had crushed me, reduced me to a lesson, a warning to every man who dared doubt his power. But he had miscalculated. The men did not move toward me like predators. They circled closer like brothers, their eyes fixed not on my body but on the door that locked us inside. It was Samuel who spoke first. His voice was low, steady, almost prayerful. This is not his night. It's ours. For a heartbeat I didn't understand. My hands trembled. My dress clung heavy to my skin, my stomach knotted with dread. But Samuel's gaze steadied me. He wasn't asking for my submission. He was asking for my decision, and I gave it. He thinks to shame me, I whispered. But shame belongs to him. Tonight we choose something else. Tonight we choose war. Josiah, the tallest, nodded once. Then let his whip taste fire instead of flesh. Elijah, scarred across the cheek, added, We've waited too long for a chance. He just handed it to us. One by one the others agreed. And then Samuel spoke the words that bound us tighter than any iron chain. 6 of us. 1 pact. His empire falls. We clasped hands in the dark, mine pale, theirs scarred. No ceremony. No scripture. Just skin to skin, breath to breath, a promise carried in silence. Father thought he had sealed my humiliation. In truth, he had given me 5 allies with nothing left to lose. The bond was not born of desire. It was born of fury, of knowing we had been marked, used, discarded, and now we would mark him back. That night, instead of breaking me, Father created a weapon he could not see. His daughter and his slaves, his 2 greatest possessions, had joined against him. When the barn door finally creaked open and the overseer's lantern cast its harsh glow, we were still together, silent, unbroken. Father had demanded proof of obedience. What he received was a secret army. I walked back into the big house with my chin lifted. To him, I looked shamed, ruined. But inside, I carried fire. That night, the bond was sealed. And Whitmore blood would pay the price. Chains became daggers the night obedience was broken. Would you turn your shame into a weapon? After that night, I was no longer father's obedient daughter. At least not on the inside. Outwardly, I played my role as he demanded. Curtsies, smiles, sweet yes-sirs at the dining table. But under the surface, every bow of my head was a blade being sharpened. The six of us began to move like shadows through the plantation. Every glance became a signal. Every whispered word a step toward war. Samuel carried the weight of strategy. He knew father's ledgers, debts, and dealings. He showed me how my father's empire was built not just on cotton, but on lies and blood. He pointed to letters where Judge Carlton pressed for my hand in marriage. "He means to trade you like land," Samuel said. My stomach twisted, but my rage burned hotter. Josiah worked in the stables. He knew which horses were swiftest, which ones could carry us through swamp and forest when the time came. He began slipping extra feed to two strong geldings, hiding them from notice. Elijah, scarred but steady, worked with the blacksmith. He smuggled nails, small scraps of iron, and slowly fashioned blades that could pass as tools by day, but would spill blood by night. Thomas and Ben moved through the quarters, spreading whispers like seeds. The time is coming. Not loud enough to spark suspicion, but enough to build readiness. They kept the people watchful, waiting for the signal. And me, my part was the most dangerous. I was father's daughter. I had the keys, the access, the chance to move unseen where no slave could step. At first it made me sick. My blood was the same as his. But if I carried his name, then I would use it as a weapon. From his study, I stole maps of Savannah roads. From his safe, I slipped a blank paper already signed with his name, meant for business deals. Samuel showed me how that paper could become a forged travel pass, not just for one of us, but for all six. And then there was the money. Father kept rolls of notes hidden in the back of the safe. I began skimming just a few bills at a time, hidden under my petticoats. He never noticed. To him, I was still his delicate Margaret, too fragile to know what wealth meant. He never saw the steel growing in me. By July, the plan had form. Horses prepared. Forged papers nearly finished. Blades hidden. Money gathered. The quarters waiting for the signal. But escape was only part of it. We weren't just running. We were ending something. Samuel said it best one night in the library, his voice hard as iron. If we flee without striking, he will rebuild. Another daughter bartered. Another whip cracked. His dynasty will stand. I met his eyes. Then we don't just leave. We make sure nothing stands when we're gone. The others agreed. This wasn't just a flight to freedom. It was a death sentence for Colonel Thaddeus Whitmore, for his empire, for the name that had caged me. The plan was set. The night was chosen, and every passing day felt like a drumbeat marching us closer to fire. Every page stolen, every coin pocketed was a strike against the dynasty. If freedom cost betrayal, would you betray blood? The storm broke sooner than we planned. Father's pride pushed everything forward. Whispers of my disgrace had already spread among neighboring planters. They smirked behind their bourbon glasses, hinting that Colonel Whitmore had lost control of his own daughter. Father's fury boiled. He needed a spectacle to prove his power. One night he summoned Samuel and the others to the yard. I watched from the veranda, my stomach burning with dread. Father's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Obedience must be sharpened with pain. These five will remember their place. The overseer, a brute named Crenshaw, stepped forward with the lash. I saw Samuel's shoulders stiffen, Josiah's jaw tighten. The men were lined like cattle, lantern light flickering against their faces. It was meant to be a lesson, but it became a spark. As Crenshaw raised the whip, Elijah moved first. In one blur, the blacksmith's scarred hand produced the hidden blade he had smuggled for weeks. The overseer's throat opened under steel before the whip even cracked. Blood sprayed the dirt, hot and bright in the lamplight. Gasps erupted. Slaves froze. Father shouted, hand reaching for his pistol. But Josiah lunged, knocking the gun aside before it cleared leather. The pistol fired into the air, the shot echoing through the fields. Dogs barked. Women screamed. Chaos broke loose. Thomas and Ben struck next, tackling a second overseer. The man's skull cracked against the stone steps of the veranda, leaving a red bloom that would stain for days. I stood frozen, lace trembling against my skin, while Father roared like a cornered beast. Samuel's eyes found mine across the frenzy. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He simply nodded once, calm, steady. The moment had come. I moved, not away, toward the study. My hands shook as I unlocked the safe, dragging out the money, the papers, the forged pass we had prepared. Outside, screams turned to battle cries as the slaves realized what was happening. The overseer's blood had broken their silence. Father stormed toward the house, pistol drawn again. He shoved past the bodies, bellowing for me. "Margaret, inside!" But when he entered, he didn't find an obedient daughter cowering. He found me holding his own money, his own papers, with fire in my eyes. "Put that down," he growled, his face twisted with rage. For the first time in my life, I said no. The words seemed to shake the walls. He froze, disbelief written across his face. And in that pause, Samuel appeared behind him, blade in hand. Father spun, fury burning hotter than fear. "You dare?" But the slaves weren't obeying anymore, not them. Not me. That night, the Whitmore house tasted blood for the first time. Not from strangers, but from within. A dynasty that thought itself untouchable had been pierced in its own parlor. And once blood has been spilled inside the big house, there is no turning back. The Whitmore house tasted blood before the fields ever burned. Would you kill one man to free hundreds? The night of blood left the plantation in chaos. Overseers dead, slaves whispering freedom through trembling lips. But chaos is never enough to break chains. Not when men like my father have friends in every courthouse, judges in their pocket, and slave catchers who smell blood like hounds. By dawn, riders thundered down the road. Judge Carleton's men, armed, mounted, ruthless. They had no interest in trials. They came for bodies, dead or chained. Father's rage had summoned them, and their pay was in flesh. Samuel had warned us. They'll come fast. They'll come with dogs. Our only chance is the swamp. Water drowns the scent, so we fled, 6 of us, bound not by blood but by the pact we had sworn. The air was heavy, thick with the stench of pine and damp earth. We moved through cypress and shadow, the ground sucking at our boots, mosquitoes thick as smoke. The horses we had hidden carried us part way, but the swamp swallowed their hooves. We loosed them, praying they would draw the riders on false trails. Behind us, the dogs bayed. Their cries split the night closer with each breath. My heart pounded like a drum, but Samuel's voice stayed steady. "Keep low. Step where I step. Noise will betray us." Josiah carried a blade. Elijah gripped a hammer smuggled from the forge. Ben and Thomas moved at the flanks, eyes scanning the reeds. I clutched the papers and the money, my hands slick with sweat, hours blurred. Each splash of water felt like thunder. Each crack of a twig made me flinch. The swamp was our shield, but also our grave if we stumbled. Then the horns. The riders were circling. We heard their voices echoing through the trees. "Fan out!" "They can't be far." We pressed on until Samuel raised his hand. He had spotted it, an old hunter's cabin half sunk in moss. Abandoned, leaning, but shelter. We crept inside, breathless. Through the slats, we saw the lanterns bobbing, voices drawing nearer. "Dogs lost the trail," one man cursed. "They doubled back. Spread wider," another barked. "The judge wants her alive. The rest dead if need be." The words chilled me. Not captured, not trial, death, except me. To them, I was still property to be retrieved. The men looked at me then. My blood, my skin, my father's name. Those things still shielded me in ways chains never could. For the first time, I hated them more than the whip itself. We waited until the voices faded. Then Samuel whispered, "They'll sweep again by morning." We moved before light, so we did. Back into the black water, through cattails and mud that swallowed our steps. The swamp became our graveyard of fear, but also our veil. By dawn, we emerged, filthy, trembling, but alive. Behind us, Whitmore's men scoured the swamp. Ahead of us lay the river road, and with it the chance to vanish. But nothing vanishes without cost. The hunters would not stop. Judge Carleton would not forgive. Father would not rest. We had spilled blood in the big house, and blood demands pursuit. The hunters became the hunted under George's moon. Could you survive one night being chased by hounds? By the third night, our bodies were breaking, Mud clung to us like chains. Our feet blistered, our bellies hollow. But worse than hunger was the sound behind us. The dogs had found the trail again. Their howls tore through the swamp like knives. We reached the river at dawn, wide, black, slow-moving but deep. It was the crossing Samuel had spoken of, the line between Whitmore's land and the world beyond his reach. Freedom's first border, but freedom never comes without a price. On the far bank, just as we began to wade in, the riders appeared, father at their head. His gray stallion pawed the ground, pistol gleaming in his hand. Judge Carlton rode beside him, his face twisted in triumph. Behind them, overseers and slave catchers, rifles raised. "Margaret!" Father's voice cracked across the water. "Come here now, before I put every one of them in chains and burn them alive at your feet." The men stiffened. Samuel's hand brushed mine. He whispered, "If you step forward, they die. If you stand with us, he dies." The river gurgled between us, carrying the weight of his words. Father's pistol leveled at Samuel. "I'll start with him." One less mouth, one less lie whispered into my daughter's head. The shot rang. Samuel fell back, not dead, but grazed, blood darkening his shirt. My scream echoed over the water, and in that scream, something broke. The last chain my father held snapped. I grabbed the pistol from Samuel's belt, the one Elijah had smuggled, the one I swore I'd never use. My hands shook, but my aim was steady. For 19 years, Father told me obedience was my virtue. For the first time, I gave him defiance. The gunshot cracked like thunder. Colonel Thaddeus Whitmore, master of 5,000 acres, slaver of 300 souls, fell from his horse into the riverbank mud. The dogs howled. The riders froze. Judge Carlton's face drained of color. Silence fell heavier than chains. Josiah roared, charging forward with his blade. Elijah swung his hammer. Ben and Thomas dragged Samuel to the water. We waded in, firing, striking, dragging each other through the current. Shots cracked behind us, bullets slicing the water, but the river carried us like a dark hand, pulling us beyond reach. On the far side, we collapsed in reeds, gasping, bleeding, alive. Behind us, Father's body lay face down in Georgia mud. His empire cracked in a single gunshot. For the first time in my life, I breathed without chains. Father fell, and with him a dynasty. Would you kill blood to save your soul? Word of Father's death spread faster than fire across dry fields. By the time Judge Carlton and the overseers dragged his body back to the big house, the plantation was already trembling. 300 souls who had lived in silence now carried a different sound. Whispers rising into shouts, shouts swelling into cries of freedom. The overseers tried to clamp down. Whips cracked, guns fired in the air, but the tide had already turned. The lash no longer brought silence, it brought rage. That night, the Whitmore house became a pyre. I wasn't there to strike the match, but I heard later how it began. A kitchen woman slipped a burning log into the drapes. A boy no older than 12 smashed lanterns across the hall. Fire leapt from curtain to timber, from roof to sky. The big house, the symbol of Father's power, roared in flames while the people he thought he owned stood and watched. Some cheered, some wept, but none obeyed. The cotton fields burned too. Bales set alight, years of wealth gone in an hour. By morning, only black ash coated the soil. Judge Carlton tried to rally order. He shouted promises of revenge, threatened to bring the law, swore he'd rebuild Whitmore's legacy. But even he saw it, the dynasty was broken. Without Father, without the house, without the slaves who had fled into swamp and forest, there was nothing left to inherit. We 6 had vanished into the night, scattered beyond his reach. Samuel carried the wound on his shoulder but lived. Josiah, Elijah, Ben, and Thomas stayed close as we pushed north. Behind us, chaos spread. Whitmore's name became a curse whispered in Georgia, a warning of how quickly power can crumble. Some said the fire was God's judgment. Others said it was madness. But the people who were there, the ones who tasted freedom in smoke and ash, knew the truth. It was justice. I never saw the big house again. I never set foot on those polished floors. Never touched the piano keys Father forced me to practice. All of it gone, reduced to cinders carried on the wind. The Whitmore dynasty died that summer. Not with ceremony, not with honor, but with fire, blood, and the silence of chains finally breaking. Georgia whispered of the daughter who betrayed her blood. Does history bury rebels or keep them alive in whispers? Years have passed since that summer, but the smell of smoke never leaves me. Some nights when I close my eyes, I still hear the dogs, still see Father's face when he realized his crown jewel had turned into his executioner. They called me a traitor. They called me a harlot. They said I ruined the Whitmore name. But the truth? That name was already rotten. It was built on backs bent in fields, on women crying in the dark, on chains clinking louder than church bells. I didn't destroy it. I only lit the match Samuel lived. His scar never faded, but neither did his strength. The others scattered. Josiah rumored to have made it as far as Ohio. Elijah said to be working iron in New York. Ben and Thomas whispered about in the Underground Railroad network. We were never all in the same room again, but our bond, our pact, was sealed forever in blood and silence. As for me, I never went back south. I carried my mother's locket and the memory of fire, and I built a life in the shadows of places where Whitmore meant nothing. A false name, a quiet house, and the knowledge that for one moment I was free because I chose rebellion instead of obedience. History won't write our story. Planters' ledgers burned. Courthouses called it unrest. Newspapers called it ruin by scandal. But whispers outlast paper. And whispers say, a daughter and 5 slaves brought down the proudest house in Georgia. If you ask me now, with gray in my hair and time stealing my breath, whether I regret it, I do not. I regret only that it took me 19 years to see that obedience is just another word for chains. Father believed virtue was silence, but silence is death. The moment I opened my mouth, the moment Samuel met my eyes and dared to answer honestly, chains began to crack. And I ask you listening now, wherever you sit, safe or not, what chains still bind your world? What dynasties stand because silence keeps them standing? Our story is not just Georgia, 1858. It is every place where obedience is demanded instead of earned, where power feeds on silence. Remember this, dynasties are not destroyed by fire or gunshot alone. They are destroyed when those inside, the ones they thought too weak to speak, choose to whisper, then shout, then strike. That was my legacy. That was our pact. And the Whitmore name, once carved into Georgia's soil like scripture, is nothing now but ash on the wind. Chains break the moment silence ends. If these hidden stories haunt you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for the next buried truth.